Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily News. I'm Nicholas Richardson. The hole in the budget is getting bigger and bigger in Poland. This year's deficit has grown to an astronomical 240 billion zloty. The government is trying to justify this with a drop in VAT revenues due to reduced inflation. But the truth is much more complex. The opposition is raising questions about whether tax mafias have made themselves comfortable in Poland again, and warning that the dire condition of Polish finances could mean cuts to social programmes.
Donald Tusk's press conference after the cabinet meeting. Among the selected media representatives, the Prime Minister mentioned a detail. The deficit is bigger, and it has to be honestly recorded in the budget law, because in some sense we have achieved more than expected. The Prime Minister did not say by how much this year's deficit was increased, nor did anyone present at the conference bother the Prime Minister with uncomfortable questions about finances, and Republika journalists who wanted to ask the question were not allowed in. It was not until several hours later that the announcement was made that the deficit would reach as much as 240 billion zloty. This is 56 billion zloty more than expected. According to government propaganda, everything is to blame for lower inflation. But does this justify such a gigantic hole in the budget? It seems to me that no, because yes, we have a decrease in inflation, but generally speaking, the government raised VAT by 5% on food, and these generally bad changes would normally make up for these losses here. Besides, if the government raises energy prices, gas prices, there are higher tax revenues associated with that as well. 56 billion zloty is slightly less than the annual cost of the 800 Plus programme. By a wide margin, this amount would be enough to raise the tax-free amount to 60,000 zloty. In the first year of Donald Tusk's government, the budget deficit turned out to be so huge that it even surpassed that of the pandemic. These are not jokes. Here it is about billions of zloty that Poles are deprived of. That's why they can't afford to implement all these programmes they've talked about here. We will all pay for the budget amendment. The higher deficit means that the finance minister will have to borrow additional billions of zloty, and this borrowing is getting more and more expensive, as can be seen from the yield on 10-year bonds, which jumped to 5.9% after yesterday's press conference. This means that the state will have to pay more interest to creditors. The increase in yields in a country, if they are rising, means that analysts and capital markets are judging the economic situation adversely. The economic situation is worsening, and higher interest rates are some kind of response to the higher risk they're facing, that the economic situation in Poland could go wrong. The Law and Justice Party says the collapse on the revenue side of the state coffers is to blame for the government's inept policies. In fact, there is a political acquiescence to the non-payment of taxes, and this can be seen in particular in VAT and CIT. The opposition is sounding the alarm that the dire status of public finances is a harbinger of cuts to social programmes. All the more so since next year's budget law assumes an even larger deficit, as much as 289 billion zloty. And here, not even the European Commission has come to the aid of Donald Tusk's government. The coalition did not uphold in the negotiations the exclusion of defence spending from the excessive deficit procedure. This means that the government will have to look for further savings in the coming years. This is a serious blow to Donald Tusk's team and Andrzej Domański, who claimed as recently as February that defence spending would not be considered in the excessive deficit procedure. We have an agreement with the European Parliament on the new EU fiscal architecture. Increased investments in defence will not be taken into account in the excessive deficit procedure. Fiscal adjustments will be allowed to last longer. The reality, however, looks different, and that means that Donald Tusk, who is supposed to play everyone in Europe, has himself been tricked again.
Law and Justice politicians are calling on the ruling coalition to reduce VAT rates to zero. It seems that the ruling coalition is deaf to the desire to help Poles, as was evident during the floods. However, the price tag is already felt by everyone, and it promises to get even more expensive. Donald Tusk pretends that nothing is happening, while experts are talking about the collapse of consumption.
As ruling coalition politicians say, it was cheaper already, I would say. And it seems unlikely to get cheaper again as prices are steadily going up, which everyone is feeling. Are you feeling the price increases in stores? Honestly, yes, very much so. Is it very acute? For me, no, while for my family, yes, especially for the elderly. It's been this expensive for a long time now, says a father of two. Everything's expensive. I feel it. There is indeed such a thing. This is the consequence of the fact that the current government, they completely failed to deal with anything. The king of Polish poverty is back, and I have the impression, or even the certainty, that this is a deliberate policy of Donald Tusk's government. The United Right, despite the crisis of the pandemic or the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, was able to introduce shields that shielded Poles' wallets. There are no shields either for heat, energy, gas. It's all going to get more expensive. Plainly, Donald Tusk has gone back to those old claims of his political friends. The money just isn't there, and there will be none. The worst thing is that there is no prospect of economic recovery, and it seems that the Prime Minister's ideas have ended. If anyone in Poland knows where these billions lie buried, well, because they're not in Zakopane, where to look for the cause of high prices. We have a weakening zloty, and a weakening Polish zloty is actually Armageddon from the point of view of the growth of the products that we import, and we import almost everything. That's certainly one of the factors that contribute to this situation. Today we are in a situation in which we are falling into a loop in which society will become poorer and the economy will fall apart. A government that thinks about the well-being of society is long overdue to start taking steps to boost economic prosperity. The Law and Justice Party has provided a project to reduce the VAT rate on food to 0%. Unfortunately, the project is stalled. The project has simply been frozen and Szymon Hołownia is playing Donald Tusk's game. It is a pity that this game is being played at the expense of Polish pockets. In September, retail sales, according to calculations by the Central Statistical Office, fell by as much as 3%. Which means that Poles are buying less and less of even basic products like clothes or shoes. It was only worse at the beginning of the pandemic.
At least 64 people, including many children, have died in floods that hit the Valencia region on Spain's east coast after Monday and Tuesday's heavy rains. The number of victims may rise. Dozens of people are still missing.
It began with a powerful hailstorm in southern Spain that broke windows and flooded streets. Water rushed into buildings at lightning speed. Many people did not have the time to escape to higher floors. The big water came from the mountains, together with the ground, trees, branches, with everything at once. One of the bridges collapsed. Water flooded the road, taking cars with it. The house at the entrance to the city just disappeared. At least 2 people have died. I'm not from here, but our neighbour, a 90-year-old man, said he had never seen anything like this in his life. The situation is at its worst in Andalusia and Valencia. Thousands of people have been trapped in homes, stores and gas stations. Buildings have been flooded and desperate people have tried by all means to get out through windows or roofs. All the services, firefighters, police and also the military, were directed to help residents. It all happened in a flash. The water took cars, demolished half of the house of one of our neighbours. At one point it reached as far as this place. It was impossible to pass that way. You couldn't even see the bridge. A lot of animals, dogs, horses have drowned. A neighbour was trapped in his car and we don't know whether he survived. Another neighbour called me to warn that it was raining intensely. About 300 or 400 litres of rain fell in a short while. Bus and train services have been completely suspended in Valencia. In Madrid, the subway is also not running. School activities were cancelled, parks were closed and planes scheduled to land in that part of Spain were diverted. A high-speed train derailed in Andalusia. Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez gave assurances that no one will be left without help. All of Spain is crying with you. Our absolute priority is to help you. We are working in a coordinated way to provide all the necessary resources as quickly as possible, for as long as it takes. We will not leave you alone. Financial assistance for infrastructure reconstruction has also been pledged by the European Union.
What we are seeing is devastating. Entire villages are covered with mud. People seeking refuge on trees and cars swept away by the fury of the waters. Tens of people have lost their lives. Thousands are displaced. And therefore our thoughts are with the victims and with the families and their friends.
The disaster in Spain is the result of a cyclone that swept through the southern and eastern parts of the country. It is the deadliest flood to hit Spain since 1996, with 87 people losing their lives then.
With the United States election just days away, officials in the most competitive battleground states are bracing for misinformation, conspiracy theories, threats and possible violence. From Labor Day to this past weekend, both campaigns have made more visits to Pennsylvania than to Georgia, Arizona and Nevada combined. How important will the issue of the migrant crisis be to the outcome of the presidential election?
Guatemala's border with Mexico. Thousands of people desperately trying to get into the last country on the road to the promised land. In recent days, there are more and more of them. They know perfectly well that this could be the last moment to try to get into the United States. The U.S. elections are coming up, so we're afraid we won't be able to apply for asylum. The policy of ending open borders is one of Donald Trump's flagship slogans. The fight against migration is one of the key issues for American voters. The Republican candidate knows very well what Americans expect from a president.
We're going to do I don't like doing this, but we're going to do the largest deportation in the history of our country. We're going to get all of these criminals out.
Less than a week before the election, Puerto Rico, the U.S. dependent island used at a Donald Trump rally for a joke by one of the most popular comedians in the States, was unexpectedly at the center of the U.S. campaign.
It is absolutely wild times. It really, really is. And, there's a lot going on. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah, I think it's called...
Such an opportunity could not be missed by Trump's opponents, who almost immediately accused Republicans of mocking Puerto Ricans. The little funny joke seemed to be a major slip-up. This is what President Joe Biden had to say.
The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. His demonization of seen as unconscionable. And it's un-American.
The incumbent president's labeling of nearly half of Americans as trash did not go unnoticed and almost immediately served as ammunition against Democrats.
Are garbage. He's talking about the Border Patrol. He's talking about nurses. He's talking about teachers. He's talking about everyday Americans who love their country and want to dream big again and support you, Mr. President. And I hope their campaign is about to apologize for what Joe Biden just said. We are not garbage. We are patriots who love America.
As if that wasn't enough, Steve Bannon, a former advisor and head of Donald Trump's previous election campaign, who served time for failing to appear before one of what he believes are illegal Senate committees, has just been released from prison.
We are going to make sure that Kamala Harris doesn't win on November 5th. We're highly confident. We've seen the polls. You've seen the numbers coming in.
Kamala Harris officially ended her campaign with her closing speech in Washington, D.C. Almost all of the speech was devoted to the threats posed by Trump's presidency. The Democratic staff is also seeing polling data.
America, this is not a candidate for president who is thinking about how to make your life better. This is someone who is unstable, obsessed with revenge, consumed with grievance, and out for unchecked power.
Swing states, and one in particular, Pennsylvania, are key, according to experts.
Rzeczywiście wszystko się może wydarzyć w dużej mierze.
Indeed, anything can happen. To a large extent, if we are trying to decide the electoral outcome, it is unpredictable. The trends are pointing to Trump. However, the game is still on. Preparations are already underway in front of the White House and Capitol in Washington, D.C. for the inauguration of the new president. As always, it will take place in the second half of January next year.
That's the news. Thank you for watching, and from me, have a good night and a better tomorrow.